Colonel Webb's explanation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He outlined the emergency preparedness drill, showed Karen the official county permits, and even explained how the exercise would benefit the community in case of natural disasters. Karen listened with growing impatience, tapping her manicured nails against her clipboard. "That's all very interesting," she said when he finished, "but you still don't have my permission. As HOA president, I have veto power over any activities that might disturb our residents or compromise our property values." "Mrs. Pemberton," Webb said quietly, "you seem to misunderstand the nature of authority. Let me give you a demonstration." He turned to his sergeant. "Rodriguez, what's the status on the emergency communications test?" "Ready to begin, sir. We're coordinating with fire, police, and emergency services for a simulated neighborhood evacuation drill." Karen's eyes widened. "Evacuation? You can't evacuate my neighborhood without proper authority." Webb smiled. "Rodriguez, initiate the drill." Suddenly, official vehicles began arriving from every direction. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cars, and emergency management personnel flooded Willowbrook Estates. Loudspeakers crackled to life, announcing a simulated emergency requiring temporary evacuation protocols. Karen watched in horror as her neighbors began emerging from their homes, following the calm instructions of emergency personnel. Mrs. Henderson from next door waved at her cheerfully while carrying her cat carrier. The Johnsons across the street were actually taking selfies with the soldiers. "Stop this!" Karen shrieked, running toward the command post that had materialized in the community center parking lot. "I did not authorize this. I am the HOA president." But something strange was happening. Her neighbors weren't backing her up. Instead, they seemed excited, engaged. Some were asking the soldiers questions about emergency preparedness. Others were thanking them for the training. Fire Chief Martins, whom Karen had complained about for unnecessary siren noise just last month, approached her with a knowing smile. "Morning, Karen. Great drill, isn't it? The colonel was just telling me how you've been so concerned about community safety. Said you specifically requested enhanced emergency preparedness training." "I never," Karen started, but Webb appeared beside her. "Mrs. Pemberton expressed concerns about our ability to protect the community," he said smoothly. "So we arranged this comprehensive demonstration. Of course, now that we've established proper emergency protocols, we'll need to conduct monthly drills. Standard procedure." "Monthly?" Karen's voice cracked. "Oh yes. And since you're so invested in community leadership, I've recommended you as our civilian liaison. You'll receive advance notice of all military training exercises in the area." Webb's smile was perfectly polite and absolutely terrifying. "You'll also get weekly briefings on flight patterns, since you've expressed such interest in our aircraft operations." Karen realized she was trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare of her own making. Every complaint she'd filed, every demand for authority she'd made, was being turned back on her as community involvement. "There's just one thing," Webb continued. "Your HOA complaint about military vehicles on public property caught the attention of Base Legal. They're curious about your authority to restrict federal operations on county roads. They'd like to discuss the legal precedents you mentioned." Karen's blood turned to ice. She hadn't actually researched those precedents. She'd been bluffing. "They should be here any minute," Webb added, glancing at his watch. Right on schedule. A black sedan pulled up, and 2 individuals in military dress uniforms stepped out, carrying briefcases. Karen recognized the look of people who lived and breathed regulations, people who could out-bureaucrat her without breaking a sweat. "Mrs. Pemberton," one of them called, "we're here about your claims regarding HOA authority over federal operations." As the lawyers approached, Karen made a desperate calculation. She could fight this battle and likely face legal consequences she couldn't afford, or she could retreat and salvage what remained of her neighborhood reputation. Karen Pemberton stood in her perfectly manicured driveway at 6:47 a.m., wielding her HOA violation clipboard like a weapon of mass destruction. Her target? The military convoy that had just rolled into Willowbrook Estates, parking their olive green vehicles along her pristine street. She marched toward the lead vehicle in her pink velour tracksuit, designer coffee mug in one hand, clipboard in the other, ready to remind these government employees exactly who ran this neighborhood. "Excuse me," she barked at the young sergeant stepping out of the truck. "I'm Karen Pemberton, HOA president, and you cannot park these tanks here without proper permits." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked up from his checklist, blinking in confusion. "Ma'am, these are standard military vehicles, and we're conducting routine training exercises approved by the county." "I don't care if you're approved by God himself," Karen interrupted, her voice rising to its signature screech. "This is a residential area with strict aesthetic guidelines. Your vehicles are violating Section 4.2 of our community standards. No commercial vehicles, and that includes whatever branch of government you represent." The sergeant glanced at his team, who were trying not to smirk. "Ma'am, we'll only be here for 3 hours conducting emergency preparedness drills with the local fire department." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. She pulled out her phone and began filming. "I'm documenting this for my attorney. You have exactly 10 minutes to move these ISOs before I call the police, the mayor, and your commanding officer. I have connections." What Karen didn't know was that Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, the base commander, lived just 2 streets over. He'd been dealing with her complaint calls about military aircraft noise pollution for months. This morning, he was observing the training exercise from his personal vehicle when his phone buzzed with yet another call from the HOA president. "Colonel Webb speaking," he answered, watching Karen through his windshield as she gestured wildly at his soldiers. "This is Karen Pemberton, and your people are in violation of multiple community ordinances. I demand you remove them immediately." "Mrs. Pemberton," Webb said calmly, "my soldiers are conducting federally mandated emergency training. However, I'll be happy to discuss this with you in person." "You better believe you will. I'm standing right here, and I'm not moving until—" Karen stopped mid-sentence as she noticed a tall, stern-faced man in uniform approaching. The same uniform as the soldiers she'd been berating. Lieutenant Colonel Webb extended his hand. "Mrs. Pemberton, I presume? I believe you wanted to speak with the commanding officer." Karen's face went through several color changes, from pink to red to an alarming shade of purple. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "I don't care what rank you are. This is my neighborhood, and I have authority here." "Your authority?" Webb raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this is public property. The street belongs to the county, not your HOA. Everything in Willowbrook Estates falls under HOA jurisdiction." Karen snapped, pulling out a thick binder. "I have legal precedents, and I'm prepared to cite them all." The lieutenant colonel glanced at his watch. His soldiers were supposed to begin their disaster response simulation in 15 minutes, but this woman seemed determined to create a real disaster of her own. "Mrs. Pemberton, I'll make you a deal. Give me 5 minutes to explain what we're doing here. And if you're still unsatisfied, I'll personally review your concerns." Karen crossed her arms triumphantly. She loved when people finally recognized her authority. "Fine, but make it quick. I have a board meeting at 9, and I'm adding this incident to the agenda." What she didn't realize was that Colonel Webb was already formulating a plan that would teach the self-appointed queen of Willowbrook Estates exactly what real authority looked like. And by the time he was finished, Karen would discover that sometimes picking fights with the wrong people leads to consequences she never saw coming. I think there may have been a misunderstanding," she said weakly. Colonel Webb nodded sympathetically. "Misunderstandings happen. Tell you what, why don't we forget about the legal review? In exchange, I'm sure you won't mind if we use Willowbrook Estates as a regular training location. With proper advance notice to our civilian liaison, of course." Karen looked around at her neighbors, who were still mingling happily with the emergency responders. She looked at the lawyers, who were studying her with professional interest. She looked at Colonel Webb, whose polite smile never wavered. She had been outmaneuvered by a master tactician, and she knew it. That would be fine," she whispered. As the drill concluded and the vehicles began to leave, Karen stood alone in her driveway, still holding her clipboard. Her phone was buzzing with texts from the HOA board members, who had heard about the exciting emergency preparedness initiative she had organized. Colonel Webb stopped his vehicle beside her. "Mrs. Pemberton, one last thing. Next month's drill involves helicopter landings. I trust that won't be a problem." Karen managed a weak nod. As he drove away, she realized she had learned something important about authority. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply acts, quietly and efficiently, until suddenly you find yourself exactly where it wants you to be. But deep down, a small part of Karen was already plotting her comeback. After all, she hadn't become HOA president by backing down from challenges. She just needed to find the right angle, the perfect loophole, the one authority even the military couldn't override. She looked at her clipboard, then at the community center where the emergency command post had been. A slow smile spread across her face. If they wanted to play bureaucratic chess, she'd show them what 20 years of HOA politics had taught her. The game was far from over.